Humanity was banned from the galaxy. So they built their own empire. The chamber had no windows. That was the first thing Admiral Lena Vasquez noticed when the Conclave's transport sealed around her delegation. No windows, no external feeds, no way to see how far they had traveled or in which direction. 14 hours of recycled air and polite silence before the doors finally opened onto a hall the size of a cathedral, its ceiling lost somewhere in pale mist, its floor a single unbroken slab of white mineral that hummed faintly underfoot. There were no seats for the human delegation. That was the second thing she noticed. Vasquez kept her expression neutral. Behind her stood Undersecretary Don Hovick from the Seoul Diplomatic Corps, Dr. Priya Anand from the Xenobiology Institute, and two silent members of the Earth Defense Directorate whose names were classified even from her. 5 humans standing on an alien floor beneath alien light, before a semicircular dais occupied by 11 species who had spent the last 19 months deliberating their fate. The Keth spoke first. They always did. Their primary voice organ produced sound in organized bursts that the translation node behind Vasquez's ear rendered as clipped, clinical English. The Galactic Conclave of Settled Worlds has concluded its review of the Terran incident record, spanning the years 2091 through 2214. 123 years of documented contact, conflict, annexation, ecological disruption, and technological proliferation. The record has been evaluated against the Conclave Charter, Article 9, Section 4, the preservation of stable interstellar order. Vasquez already knew where this was going. She had known for 6 months, since the preliminary communique from the Keth ambassador on Proxima Station had landed on her desk with the subject line, Preliminary Recommendation, Terran Exclusion Zone. She had read it 3 times before she stopped hoping it was a mistranslation. It is the determination of the Conclave, the Keth continued, that Terran expansion represents a persistent destabilizing variable that existing regulatory frameworks have proven insufficient to contain. 11 member civilizations voted in favor of formal exclusion. 2 abstained. None voted in opposition. Hovick, behind her, exhaled very slowly. Humanity is hereby designated a restricted origin species. Effective in 18 standard months, all Terran vessels operating beyond a radius of 40 light-years from Sol will be considered in violation of Conclave space. Member civilizations are authorized to enforce this boundary by any proportionate means. Vasquez waited. She had prepared a response. 47 pages, cross-referenced with Conclave precedent, cataloging every instance where another species had caused comparable disruption and faced lesser consequences. She had read those pages until she could recite them. She didn't deliver them. Because in the 11 faces arrayed before her, faces that were not faces in the human sense, faces that were compound, crystalline, gaseous, folded, she saw something that no diplomatic brief had prepared her for. Not hostility. Not contempt. Pity. They felt sorry for humanity. They had drawn a circle around the solar system the way you draw a circle around a fire that has gotten too large for the hearth. Carefully. Regretfully. With genuine concern for the furniture. We acknowledge the ruling, Vasquez said. Her voice came out even. She was proud of that. The transport collected them within the hour. The doors sealed. No windows. On the long journey back to the relay station at Tau Ceti, none of them spoke for the first 4 hours. Then Hovick opened his personal terminal and started typing. Anand stared at her hands. The 2 directorate officers sat with their eyes forward and their expressions unreadable. Vasquez thought about the word containment. She thought about what containment looked like from the inside of the thing being contained. She thought about the 40 light-year radius. She pulled up a star chart on her lens display and traced it. A sphere centered on Sol, its edge grazing Proxima Centauri, clipping the outermost Terran research stations at Wolf 359 and Luton Star, cutting right through the middle of the Kepler corridor that humanity had spent 60 years building. Inside that sphere, 11 billion people. 4 terraformed worlds. Dozens of stations, shipyards, research outposts. A civilization that had reached the stars through 3 centuries of catastrophe, adaptation, and sheer exhaustion. Outside that sphere, 400 known civilizations. Trade routes. Resources. History. The future as humanity had imagined it. She zoomed out on the star chart until Sol was a pixel. Then she zoomed out further, until the 40 light-year exclusion zone was a faint circle around a faint dot in the outer arm of the Milky Way. Such a small boundary for such a large species. She closed the display. Hovick, she said. Ma'am? Get me a secure channel to Director Okafor at the Directorate. Priority seal. I don't want this routing through any Conclave relay infrastructure. Pause. That'll take routing through the private beacon network. It's slow. I know. Do it anyway. Another pause. What should I tell him the subject is? Vasquez looked at the blank wall where a window should have been. Tell him, she said, that we need to have a conversation about what 40 light years actually means. And what lies beyond it. She leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes. 18 months. That was what the conclave had given them. Not as generosity as procedure. Time to recall vessels, close stations, retreat within the circle. Vasquez had spent 20 years in the directorate. She knew what 18 months looked like when a government was preparing to comply. She also knew now what it looked like when a government was preparing to do something else entirely. The transport hummed. The recycled air moved in its quiet loop. Somewhere outside, between the stars, the boundary that would define humanity's future was already being calculated and mapped and prepared. They just hadn't decided yet whether it was a cage or a starting line. Director Solomon Okafor did not read the formal exclusion notice when it arrived. His assistant had flagged it, formatted it, and placed it at the top of his morning brief with a small red indicator that meant critical and time-sensitive. Okafor had looked at it for about 4 seconds, then moved it to a subfolder he mentally labeled problems that already have solutions and pulled up a different document entirely. The document was 3 years old. It had been drafted by a working group that officially didn't exist, inside a division of the Earth Defense Directorate that had no public-facing name, funded through a budgetary line item listed as Long-Range Infrastructure Feasibility Research. Its title was Project Meridian, Conceptual Framework for Autonomous Terran Development Beyond Primary Contact Zones. In plain language, what do we build if they ever lock us out? Okafor had commissioned it in 2211, 2 years before the Proxima incident that had finally tipped the conclave toward formal action. He hadn't commissioned it because he was clairvoyant. He had commissioned it because he had spent 30 years studying the conclave's internal communications, legally obtained through treaty disclosure, meticulously analyzed, and he had seen the pattern long before the diplomats had. The conclave wasn't hostile to humanity. That was what made them so dangerous. Hostile powers you could negotiate with, escalate against, outlast. The conclave was something worse, a bureaucracy that had genuinely convinced itself it was acting in everyone's best interests. It had absorbed dozens of young spacefaring species over the centuries, drawn boundaries around the disruptive ones, waited for them to stabilize, and then gradually, graciously integrated them into the larger order. It had worked every time. Every time, that is, with species that had accepted the boundary. Okafor pulled up the Meridian document's executive summary and read it the way he always read it when the news was bad, not for information but for grounding. The way some people read scripture. The fundamental constraint of the conclave exclusion model, the summary began, is that it assumes the excluded party will remain static. Historical precedent supports this assumption. Every previously restricted species operated within resource and technological bands that made genuine independent development impossible without conclave trade access. Humanity is the first restricted species to enter exclusion with a fully developed industrial base, a functional faster-than-light capability, and a research infrastructure capable of indigenous innovation. In short, humanity can build without them. The question is not whether Terran civilization can survive exclusion. It will. The question is what it chooses to build during the period when no one is watching. Okafor closed the summary and opened the full document, 612 pages including annexes. The first annex was a star chart. Not the conclave star chart, with its color-coded trade lanes and member civilization boundaries and careful notation of every mapped system within 1,000 light-years of the galactic core. The conclave's chart was a document of ownership. Here is what exists, here is who controls it, here are the rules. Meridian's chart was different. It showed the same stars, but it showed them the way a surveyor sees empty land before the property lines are drawn. The highlighted region was not inside the 40 light-year exclusion zone. It was outside it. Far outside it. Out past the trailing edge of the Orion Arm, where the stellar density dropped, where the conclave's member civilizations thinned out, where the trade routes became speculation and the maps became vague. A volume of space that the conclave had catalogued but never significantly settled, because its resource profile was mediocre by their standards. No exotic materials, no strategically significant hyperlane junctions, nothing that made it worth the political effort of formal claim. By human standards it was extraordinary. 47 star systems within a 200 light-year corridor. 16 with planets in the liquid water band. 7 with atmospheres that fell within Terran terraforming parameters. 3 with existing biospheres complex enough to be interesting but not complex enough to be protected under conclave ecological law. The working group had named it the Reach. Okafor's secure terminal chimed. Vasquez's channel request, routed through the private beacon network, low bandwidth and slow but clean. He accepted it. Her face resolved on screen, pixelated slightly from the relay delay. She looked tired. She also looked like someone who had already done the math and arrived at the same answer he had. I assume you've read the Meridian document, he said without preamble. A pause, transmission lag. Then, I read it on the way back from the conclave. The whole thing. I have questions about the logistics of Phase 3. Phase 3 is aggressive. Phase 3 is necessary. 18 months isn't enough time to move people, but it's enough time to move infrastructure. Fabricators. Seed stocks. The Arkhangelsk-class transports, the 3 that are technically listed as decommissioned. They're not decommissioned. I know they're not decommissioned. He looked at the star chart. The Reach, unmarked on any conclave map as anything more than a vague frontier notation. Empty by their standards. By human standards, a continent. The Charter, he said. Article 9, Section 4. We're a restricted origin species. That applies to conclave space. The Reach isn't conclave space, Vasquez said. Another pause. This one wasn't transmission lag. No, Okafor agreed. It isn't. He pulled up the activation protocols for Meridian Phase 1. They had been drafted, reviewed, and quietly pre-authorized by the Emergency Powers Committee 2 years ago, in a closed session that had generated no public record. The conclave had given humanity 18 months to retreat. Okafor intended to use every day of it. Not to retreat. To move. The media called it the Resettlement Initiative. The official directorate framing, carefully crafted by a communications team that had been briefed on Meridian but not on its full scope, described it as a proactive humanitarian consolidation, a responsible effort to bring outlying Terran populations within the exclusion boundary before enforcement began. It was technically true. What the press releases did not mention was the specific composition of the ships. Commander Yara Solis first understood the scale of what was happening on the day she was assigned to the Arkhangelsk 4, a vessel listed in official naval records as a decommissioned or processor undergoing salvage inspection at the Ceres shipyard. She had been told to report to Ceres for a routine technical review. She arrived to find a ship that had been gutted and rebuilt from its internal frames outward, its cargo bays replaced with modular habitat rings, its reactor plant tripled, its drive systems upgraded to a 4th-generation Alcubierre configuration that Solis had only previously seen in classified development reports. It could carry 12,000 people. It could sustain them for 4 years without resupply. Its fabrication suite could manufacture everything from basic tools to starship components. Its seed vault contained the genetic library of every domesticated crop and animal species humanity had ever developed. The Arkhangelsk 4 was not a transport. It was a civilization in a hull. Ma'am? Her new executive officer, Lieutenant Brendan Cha, fell into step beside her as she walked the primary habitat corridor on day 1. I've been reviewing the cargo manifest. There are some irregularities. Define irregularities. The geology section. We're carrying 3 full seismic survey teams, 12 deep core drilling rigs, and enough atmospheric processing equipment to seed a planet. Yes. We're a passenger transport. We are, Solis agreed. Among other things. Cha was quiet for a moment. He was 28, ambitious, and smart enough to have been flagged by the Directorate's recruitment analysis as someone who asked the right questions at the right time. That was why he was here. The passengers, he said. I reviewed the manifest. We have 200 engineers, 44 xenobiologists, 60 terraforming specialists, 80 construction foremen, 12 doctors, 9 lawyers. Lawyers? Constitutional law specialists. And 3 professors of conclave treaty interpretation. Solis stopped walking. She turned to face him. Lieutenant Cha. What kind of ship carries constitutional lawyers and terraforming equipment? He looked at her for a long moment. The kind of ship, he said carefully, that's going somewhere that needs a government. She held his gaze. The destination in your sealed orders is listed as Waypoint Sigma 7, which is inside the exclusion zone. Correct. Correct. Sigma 7 is a relay station. It will be our last stop inside conclave space. She resumed walking. After Sigma 7 we will receive updated navigational data. At that point the mission profile changes. Our destination will be a system designated in Meridian as Reach Prime. It is approximately 340 light-years from Sol, Cha absorbed this. That's well outside the exclusion zone. Yes. That's also not conclave space. Correct. So we're not retreating inside the boundary. No. He paused, working through it. We're going around it. Solis glanced at him sideways. I need an XO who can brief the crew in 6 days. Who can explain to 12,000 people why they are going to spend 2 years in transit to a star system that doesn't appear on any public chart, to build something that doesn't have a name yet. I need someone who can make them understand that this is not exile. She paused. Can you do that? Cha straightened almost imperceptibly. What is it then if not exile? Solis looked down the long corridor at the hundreds of faces that would become her responsibility. Families with children, engineers with laptops, a woman carrying an infant against her chest, all of them having boarded a ship whose true purpose had been explained to them only in the broadest terms. Tell them, she said, that the conclave drew a line around us. Tell them we're not crossing the line. She paused. Tell them we're simply walking away from it. The media called it the Resettlement Initiative. The official directorate framing, carefully crafted by a communications team that had been briefed on Meridian but not on its full scope, described it as a proactive humanitarian consolidation, a responsible effort to bring outlying Terran populations within the exclusion boundary before enforcement began. It was technically true. What the press releases did not mention was the specific composition of the ships. Commander Yara Solis first understood the scale of what was happening on the day she was assigned to the Arkhangelsk IV, a vessel listed in official naval records as a decommissioned or processor undergoing salvage inspection at the Ceres shipyard. She had been told to report to Ceres for a routine technical review. She arrived to find a ship that had been gutted and rebuilt from its internal frames outward, its cargo bays replaced with modular habitat rings, its reactor plant tripled, its drive systems upgraded to a 4th-generation Alcubierre configuration that Solis had only previously seen in classified development reports. It could carry 12,000 people. It could sustain them for 4 years without resupply. Its fabrication suite could manufacture everything from basic tools to starship components. Its seed vault contained the genetic library of every domesticated crop and animal species humanity had ever developed. The Arkhangelsk IV was not a transport. It was a civilization in a hull. Ma'am? Her new executive officer, Lieutenant Brendan Cha, fell into step beside her as she walked the primary habitat corridor on day 1. I've been reviewing the cargo manifest. There are some irregularities. Define irregularities. The geology section. We're carrying 3 full seismic survey teams, 12 deep core drilling rigs, and enough atmospheric processing equipment to seed a planet. Yes. We're a passenger transport. We are, Solis agreed. Among other things. Cha was quiet for a moment. He was 28, ambitious, and smart enough to have been flagged by the Directorate's recruitment analysis as someone who asked the right questions at the right time. That was why he was here. The passengers, he said. I reviewed the manifest. We have 200 engineers, 44 xenobiologists, 60 terraforming specialists, 80 construction foremen, 12 doctors, 9 lawyers. Lawyers? Constitutional law specialists. And 3 professors of conclave treaty interpretation. Solis stopped walking. She turned to face him. Lieutenant Cha. What kind of ship carries constitutional lawyers and terraforming equipment? He looked at her for a long moment. The kind of ship, he said carefully, that's going somewhere that needs a government. She held his gaze. The destination in your sealed orders is listed as Waypoint Sigma 7, which is inside the exclusion zone. Correct. Correct. Sigma 7 is a relay station. It will be our last stop inside conclave space. She resumed walking. After Sigma 7 we will receive updated navigational data. At that point the mission profile changes. Our destination will be a system designated in Meridian as Reach Prime. It is approximately 340 light-years from Sol. Cha absorbed this. That's well outside the exclusion zone. Yes. That's also not conclave space. Correct. So we're not retreating inside the boundary. No. He paused, working through it. We're going around it. Solis glanced at him sideways. I need an XO who can brief the crew in 6 days. Who can explain to 12,000 people why they are going to spend 2 years in transit to a star system that doesn't appear on any public chart, to build something that doesn't have a name yet. I need someone who can make them understand that this is not exile. She paused. Can you do that? Cha straightened almost imperceptibly. What is it then if not exile? Solis looked down the long corridor at the hundreds of faces that would become her responsibility. families with children, engineers with laptops, a woman carrying an infant against her chest, all of them having boarded a ship whose true purpose had been explained to them only in the broadest terms. "Tell them," she said, "that the conclave drew a line around us. Tell them we're not crossing the line." She paused. "Tell them we're simply walking away from it." The planet had no name when they arrived. That was the first thing Cha noted in the mission log, not the spectral data, not the atmospheric readings, not the preliminary surface scans that were already coming back better than the projections had dared to suggest. Just that. The planet has no name. Solis stood at the bridge viewport for the better part of an hour after they dropped from FTL transit, looking at it. It was not beautiful in the way that Earth was beautiful from orbit, that particular blue marble perfection that existed in every human's visual memory whether they'd been born on Earth or not. This was rougher. The continents were ungainly shapes, brown and gray and dark green, vast and irregular. The oceans were shallower, slightly darker. The cloud systems were thicker near the equatorial band. But the atmospheric spectrometer had returned its verdict within minutes of their arrival. Nitrogen-oxygen mix, 19.4% O2, pressure at 0.94 atm at projected sea level. Trace CO2. Water vapor consistent with active hydrological cycle. A human being could stand on that surface and breathe. Not comfortably, not yet. The biome was alien, the microbial environment was unknown, the atmospheric chemistry had subtle differences that would require time and adaptation. But breathe. Solis had read about the first settlers of Mars, who had lived in sealed habitats for generations before the terraforming made the surface survivable. She had read about the first generation born on Proxima's second planet, who had grown up in gravity 0.2 g below Earth standard and developed subtly different bone structures because of it. Humanity had always adapted. That was not even remarkable anymore. It was simply what humans did. "Begin surface prep," she said. The next 72 hours were controlled chaos. The Arkhangelsk 4 and its 4 companion ships, the Novgorod, the Cape Town, the Medina, and the Jiuquan, deployed their landing systems in coordinated sequence. The site selection AIs had spent the transit identifying a coastal plateau in the northern temperate zone. Stable geology, accessible fresh water, sheltered from the worst of the equatorial storm systems, with good solar exposure and proximity to mineral deposits flagged by the survey probes. Solis went down in the third landing wave. The shuttle broke through cloud cover at 4,000 meters, and for the first time she saw the surface not through sensors but through her own eyes. The plateau was vast and gray-green, covered in something that was not grass but functioned like it, low, dense, fibrous growth that moved in the wind like a single organism. To the west, a range of hills. To the east, the dark glitter of the sea. The shuttle touched down. The ramp deployed. She walked out into alien air and stood on an alien world and felt the wind on her face. It smelled like rain and iron and something else she couldn't name, something that might have been soil, might have been biology, might have been pure chemistry, but which her brain, helplessly human, filed under the category outside. Around her, the engineers were already working. Habitat modules unfolding. Survey drones lifting. A crew of 6 geology techs walking the plateau in a grid pattern, instruments extended. Cha appeared at her shoulder. Site assessment says we can have the first permanent structure up in 11 days. Power grid online in 3 weeks. Initial food production in 60 days if the soil additives perform as modeled. And the name? He looked at her. Sorry? The planet? In the log this morning you noted it had no name. Oh. He thought about it. Crew's been running informal suggestions since we hit orbit. Leading candidate is New Providence. Pause. Though someone in the geology section is pushing hard for bedrock. Solis looked at the gray-green growth moving in the wind. At the hills to the west. At the dark sea. Neither, she said. Ma'am? The conclave names places after what they are or what they're for. Resource designations. Positional coordinates dressed up as proper nouns. She watched a construction drone begin laying the foundation grid for the first habitat block. We name places after what we feel when we arrive. Cha considered this. What do you feel? She took a long breath of alien air and felt the weight of 340 light-years behind her, and 11 billion people in a sphere 40 light-years across, and 18 conclave enforcement vessels that would, in about 4 more months, begin actively patrolling a boundary that humanity was no longer anywhere near. Relief, she said. He pulled out his log tablet. Relief. No, not relief. She turned back toward the growing camp, where 12,000 people were beginning to build the first human structure on the first world of what was not yet, but would soon be, something entirely new. Threshold, she said. Name it Threshold. Year 3 Threshold. The permanent population of Threshold had reached 42,000, drawn from the initial 5 colony ships and 2 subsequent resupply missions that had followed the first convoy's path through the Reach corridor. The habitat ring had expanded 3 times. There were 2 working farms, a field hospital, a university annex, a shipyard, small by Seoul standards but functional, and a governing council whose constitutional framework had been drafted by those 3 lawyers Cha had once found puzzling. The council met weekly in a structure built from threshold stone, a blue-gray mineral that turns silver in the rain. The roof was printed polymer. The chairs were local timber, a dense dark wood from a tree analog that had turned out to be safe to mill if you wore respiratory protection during cutting. Humans adapted. Humans always adapted. Solis sat in the back during council sessions, which was technically her right as mission commander and practically her preference since her official role had transitioned from naval officer to something without a good precedent. Not a governor, not a general, not an ambassador. The closest word was founder, though she found it uncomfortably large for her own self-image. The agenda item that morning was formal contact. Not with the conclave. With the other 2 colony sites that had been established in the Reach over the previous 18 months. A settlement called Ironwood on a high-gravity world 30 light-years spinward, and a research outpost on a gas giant's moon called simply Station 11. Proposal before the council, said Councillor Fatima Osei, who had been a maritime law professor on Earth and was now, improbably, writing the foundational legal code for an interstellar polity. Formalization of the Reach Compact. 3 founding signatories, Threshold, Ironwood, Station 11. Mutual defense, trade, legal jurisdiction framework, shared technical standards. Solis listened. The debate that followed was long and occasionally heated and entirely genuine. There were serious disagreements about jurisdiction. About whether Ironwood's high-gravity settlement should receive preferential terms because of its resource contribution. About what mutual defense meant when you were 3 settlements separated by decades of light travel and none of you had a real navy yet. Real politics. Messy and human and alive. She thought about the conclave chamber. The 11 faces, unreadable and pitying. The verdict delivered in the language of management. There were no windows in that chamber. There were windows here. Cha sat down next to her. He had grown a beard in the last year, which made him look older than his 31 years. He had also in that year been elected to a seat on the Environmental Management Committee, which had surprised him and not surprised Solis at all. Signal from Director Okafor, he said quietly. Came through the beacon relay this morning. And? The conclave has finished its enforcement sweep. All Terran vessels are confirmed within the exclusion boundary. He paused. They're satisfied. Solis kept her eyes on Councillor Osei, who was drawing a diagram on a whiteboard to illustrate a point about jurisdiction overlap. Of course they are, she said. There's a secondary note. Classified, director level only. He handed her a small tablet. I'm not technically supposed to have read it. But you did. Old habit. She read it. The note was brief. It said, Meridian Phase 2 is proceeding ahead of schedule. 7 additional colony ships have been authorized and are currently in transit through the Reach corridor. Estimated arrival, threshold and secondary sites, 14 months. Payload includes advanced manufacturing capacity, medical genetics lab, and she paused over the next line, Alcubierre Drive R&D team, priority mission. Extend FTL range to enable Reach deep survey. Deep survey. Past the Reach. Into the space beyond the space that the conclave hadn't bothered to map carefully. She handed the tablet back to Cha. On the whiteboard, Councillor Osei had finished her diagram. The 3 settlements were circles, connected by lines with a 4th circle drawn in dotted outline. Future membership, the label read. How many systems do you think there are? Cha said quietly. In a corridor 1,000 light-years deep, in a direction the conclave has never significantly explored? Hundreds, Solis said. Thousands possibly. And we have the only FTL technology designed for indigenous operation. No reliance on conclave hyperlane infrastructure. Correct. He looked at the dotted circle on the whiteboard, the 4th settlement, not yet named, not yet real, but drawn there a statement of intent. They thought they were containing us, he said. They thought we needed them, Solis said. They thought restriction was the same as limitation. The council voted. The Reach Compact passed, 14-2 with 1 abstention. Solis looked out the window at Threshold's gray-green plains under a sky that was not quite earth blue, and she thought about what 14 months meant, and 7 colony ships, and an R&D team with a single priority mission. The conclave had drawn a circle. Humanity had stepped outside it, and in the dark beyond the circle's edge, they had found something the Conclave had never counted on. Year 9 Threshold. The ship that arrived from Seoul was a diplomatic courier, small and fast, registered under a neutral flag that technically didn't exist anymore since the organization that had issued it had been quietly dissolved 2 years prior. Its pilot was a woman named Farida Khaled who introduced herself as a directorate liaison and asked to meet with Solis in a room without recording equipment. Solis found this interesting. She agreed. They sat in her office, a real office now, stone walls and local timber floors and a window looking west toward the hills, which had been named the Vasquez Range without her consent, and Khaled placed a single document on the desk. It was a formal communiqué from the Galactic Conclave of Settled Worlds, addressed to the Governing Council of the Reach Compact. Solis read it carefully. Then she read it again. "They know," Khaled said. "How long have they known?" "Officially? 3 weeks. Unofficially," Khaled paused. "One of their long-range survey vessels passed through the outer reach about 14 months ago. Standard mapping mission. They picked up the beacon networks, the industrial emissions, the FTL signatures from the drive tests." Pause. "They didn't file a report immediately." Solis looked up. "Why not?" Khaled's expression was carefully neutral. "Because the survey vessel was commanded by a Keth officer who had been on the review board for the original exclusion verdict. Apparently she, or the closest pronoun, spent some time reviewing what she found before deciding how to characterize it." Another pause. "She filed the report as anomalous industrial signatures, possible equipment cache, requiring follow-up investigation. Giving us time. 14 months of it." Solis thought about the Keth ambassador in the windowless chamber 9 years ago. The pity in those unreadable compound eyes. Maybe not pity. Maybe something more complicated. She looked at the communiqué again. The formal language was familiar, she'd read enough conclave documents to parse it quickly, but the content was not what she had expected. It was not a cease and desist. It was not an ultimatum. It was an inquiry. Specifically, the conclave wished to know the legal status of the entities operating within the region designated in Terran records as the Reach, insofar as said entities might or might not be considered extensions of the restricted origin species designation applied to humanity under Article 9, Section 4. "They're asking," Solis said slowly, "whether we're still human. In the legal sense." "In the legal sense." She set the document down. "The Reach Compact is a sovereign entity. It was founded by humans, but its founding documents don't reference Sol, Earth, or the Terran state. Its citizens have taken no oath to Earth's government. Several of the children born here have never been to Earth and never will be. That's the argument Osei has been developing, yes." Khaled leaned forward slightly. "The Conclave's exclusion applied to Terrans. To the Terran state. The Reach Compact, technically, legally, is a new polity. Not a Terran colony. Not a dependency. A new member of the galactic community, unaffiliated with the restricted origin species." Solis was quiet for a long moment. "They gave us 18 months, she said. To retreat. We used that time to plant seeds outside the boundary. They drew a line around humanity and we simply walked past it. And they're not angry. Some of them are angry," Khaled said carefully. "But the ones who matter most appear to be," she searched for the word, "interested. Interested. You have 42,000 people on this world alone. 80,000 across the compact. 11 functioning settlements. An industrial base, a legal framework, an indigenous FTL program that has now mapped 214 systems," Solis said. Khaled blinked. "Our intelligence said 160. We've been busy." Solis allowed herself a small smile. 214 systems. 31 with habitable worlds. 9 with existing biospheres. 3 she paused, with existing sapient life. The silence that followed was different from the previous silences. 3, Khaled repeated. Pre-industrial. 1 is early agricultural. 2 are pre-contact hunter-gatherer, approximately equivalent to late Paleolithic. We have not made contact. We have not approached. We have standing orders from the Council that all 3 systems are off-limits pending development of a contact protocol. Solis looked at Khaled steadily. "A contact protocol that we are developing ourselves? Without conclave guidance because we have not asked for it. And without conclave oversight because this is not conclave space." The implication sat in the room between them. The conclave had excluded humanity for being disruptive, destabilizing, incapable of managing first contact responsibly. And in the 9 years since, in the space beyond their boundary, humanity had found 3 pre-industrial civilizations and had not touched them. Had not even breathed on them. I need to transmit a response to the conclave, Solis said. Draft it with Osei. Formal, measured, correct. The Reach Compact acknowledges receipt of the conclave inquiry and invites a formal diplomatic dialogue regarding the compact's status as an independent sovereign entity. She paused. Use their own charter language. Article 12, Section 1, the right of emerging spacefaring civilizations to petition for recognized status. Khalid stared at her. You want to join the conclave? I want them to have to decide, Solis said, whether we qualify. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, the plains of Threshold were green now, not earth green, not quite, but green and alive and growing. The Vasquez Range caught the evening light in long amber slopes. 9 years ago, a windowless room. 11 faces and pity in all of them. Let them look now. The conclave's response took 4 months to arrive. 4 months during which 3 new colony ships entered the Reach Corridor, Ironwood's population crossed 100,000, and the FTL range extension program achieved its first successful transit to a system designated Reach Deep 7. A world of red forests and shallow inland seas, 300 light-years beyond Threshold, further from Sol than any human had ever been. They named it Longview. The conclave's response, when it came, was not delivered through a courier. It was delivered through an official diplomatic vessel, a large and ornately designed craft of Keth construction, carrying a full delegation of 7. The Keth ambassador who led the delegation was named, in the closest translatable approximation, Assessor Vel, and Solis had done enough research in the intervening months to understand that an assessor was not a standard diplomatic rank. An assessor was what the Keth sent when they needed to understand something they hadn't expected. The meeting was held in the council chamber. The same stone walls. The same local timber chairs. The same windows. Solis had made sure of the windows. Assessor Vel's sensory apparatus moved across the room in slow, considered arcs. The other 6 Keth delegates arranged themselves behind her with the quiet precision of people accustomed to formal proceedings. Osei was present with 2 other council members. Cha sat beside Solis. Khalid was in the back watching. The conclave has reviewed the Reach Compact's petition for recognized status under Article 12, Vel began. The translation node rendered the voice as careful, measured, and, Solis thought, genuinely uncertain, which from a Keth was unusual enough to be remarkable. The review has raised considerable discussion. I imagine it has, Solis said. The question of continuity is the central difficulty. Article 9, Section 4 applies to the Terran state and its citizens. The Reach Compact's legal argument, that it constitutes a distinct and sovereign emergence, has been reviewed by the conclave's treaty scholars. Their conclusion, after some disagreement, is that the argument is not without merit. Osei, beside Solis, kept her expression professionally neutral. Under the table, Solis could see her right hand gripping a pen so tightly her knuckles had changed color. However, Vel continued, merit is not the only consideration. The conclave has also reviewed your survey records, shared as part of the petition documentation. The systems cataloged. The 3 pre-contact worlds. Pause. Your contact protocols. Which we developed independently, Solis said. Yes. This was noted. Another pause longer. The conclave's original exclusion verdict was based on a documented pattern of behavior: rapid expansion, inadequate assessment, contact events that caused harm to developing species. The record was clear. The record was from before. Yes, Vel said. Before. The assessor's sensory apparatus settled, finally, in the direction of the window, the gray-green plains, the distant hills and amber afternoon light. Your people have been in the Reach for 9 standard years. You have encountered 3 developing civilizations and have not approached any of them. You have established 11 settlements without triggering a single conclave ecological protection incident. You have built a legal and governmental framework that, whatever its origins, is currently functioning. Pause. This is not the pattern that was documented. No, Solis agreed. It isn't. Vel turned back from the window. I am authorized to convey the following. The conclave proposes that the Reach Compact be granted provisional recognized status as an emerging spacefaring polity, distinct from the Terran restricted origin designation, subject to a 10-year observation period and compliance with Article 12 standards. The room was silent. Osei set her pen down very carefully. Cha exhaled beside Solis just slightly, just enough. Provisional. 10 years of observation. Not full membership. Not an apology. Not an admission that the exclusion had been wrong, or that humanity had been judged unfairly by a body that had never fully understood what it was dealing with. But a seat. The beginning of a seat. Solis thought about what she might say. She had prepared several responses, in the same way she had prepared 47 pages of counterargument 9 years ago in a windowless transport. She had language about sovereignty, about precedent, about the 3 pre-contact worlds and what humanity's restraint regarding them said about the civilization the Reach had become. She didn't use any of it. Before I respond formally, she said, I want to show you something. She pulled up a map on the chamber's display, not the Conclave's map, not Meridian's map. The Reach Compact's own survey records, updated to the previous month. 214 catalog systems. 11 settlements. The 3 protected pre-contact worlds marked in amber, off-limits, annotated with the developing contact protocol. The deep survey corridor stretching outward, past Threshold, past the early colonies, out to Longview and beyond. Then she zoomed out. Further. Until the entire Reach was a small bright cluster in the outer galactic arm. Until the Conclave's member civilizations were a dense glow toward the core. Until the space between them, unclaimed, unmapped, vast, was visible as the simple geographic fact it was. We didn't build this to oppose you, she said. We built it because we had to build something. That is what humans do. She let the map stay on the display. You drew a boundary and we walked past it and found room to grow into something you didn't expect. Not because we're disruptive. Because we're, she paused, choosing. Persistent. Vel's sensory apparatus regarded the map for a long moment. Yes, the assessor said quietly. We are beginning to understand that. The formal response took another 2 hours to draft, with Osei doing most of the legal language and Solis reviewing every line. The Reach Compact accepted the Conclave's proposal for provisional status with 3 amendments, all of which Vel agreed to after brief consultation with her delegation. When the Keth vessel departed the next morning, Solis stood outside the council chamber and watched it rise above the plains of Threshold, banking east over the gray-green growth and the dark sea, climbing into a sky that was not quite earth blue, and vanishing into the high atmosphere. Cha stood beside her. He had brought 2 cups of the local grain coffee that the settlement's botanists had spent 3 years developing, and which was not good but was drinkable and was theirs. Provisional, he said. For now. 10 years is a long time. We built this in 9. She took the coffee and looked east, where the sea caught the morning light. In 10 we'll have 40 settlements, a proper navy, and a contact team ready to approach the first of the pre-contact worlds. When the 10 years are done, they won't be reviewing us anymore. What will they be doing? She thought about the map. The dense glow of conclave civilizations anchored near the core. The small bright cluster of the Reach far out in the thinning arm. The vast dark space between and beyond. Negotiating, she said. A cool wind came off the sea, moving through the fibrous growth on the plateau. Somewhere behind them, in the camp that was now a city, 12,000 people had become 80,000, and the sound of it, machinery and voices and children and the particular ambient hum of a civilization in motion, carried on the morning air. The conclave had drawn a line around humanity. Humanity had not crossed it, had not broken it, and not even argued with it. They had simply looked past it into the dark and found that the dark was full of room. And they had built.